Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome. We're glad that you have joined us today for our webinar on supporting women's mental health across the lifespan. As we give folks a few minutes to join us, I want to introduce myself. My name is Kristen Ward, and I'm the Vice President of Programs and Knowledge at Mindful Philanthropy. And I'm so pleased for you to join us and have this conversation as it relates to supporting women across their lifespan, all the way from young girls and teens up to supporting women's mental health as they age. Mindful Philanthropy was launched in 2020 with the mission of catalyzing impactful funding in mental health, addiction, and well-being. In our work, we connect and convene funders through our gatherings, as well as connecting them with subject matter experts and other folks working in this field to help speed up their learning journey and direct funders toward greater impact, while also helping funders to really identify their strategy and understand how their drivers and priorities align with opportunities for impact in the field, while also uplifting impactful opportunities and solutions and helping to curate and cultivate those solutions across a varied degree of issue areas. Since 2020, Mindful Philanthropy has released over 35 guidance documents on many topics. For example, in 2021, we launched an effort to drive greater funding toward mental health in schools, which we refer to as our Thriving in Schools initiative. Through this, we produced over 4 guidances and a number of blog posts and other articles, hosted a number of events, and launched our first learning collaborative with more than 23 funders. We've also released guidance focused on providing comprehensive support to those before, during, and after acute mental health crises, as well as advancing culturally led mental health programs that are driven for and by the community, as well as a series of primers that highlight the intersection of mental health and other issue areas such as housing and sports. Most recently, Mindful Philanthropy launched Mental Health at the Center, which is a guidance series that started with the release of 2 reports, which will continue throughout this year, that are working to guide philanthropy to invest in mental health as a central part of their focus. Whether that's a pillar as a new focus in their work or an intersecting pillar embedded in other focus areas. The first document was a case for investment, which maps out how mental health intersects with other issue areas, as well as unpacks the needs, gaps, and opportunities for supporting mental health across the lifespan. The second is a strategic roadmap for investment, which highlights 5 priority areas for funders to support that are most likely to make a difference. The remaining 2 reports will provide a deeper understanding of the funding landscape, while also providing guidance to funders in measuring success. So we would love for everyone who has joined us today to make sure that we are incorporating your input and your work as funders and nonprofits, subject matter experts and academics, policymakers and practitioners as a part of this effort. So my colleague Julia is going to drop here in the chat 2 surveys linked specifically for one for funders and another for nonprofits. So please take the time right now to complete those surveys, open those links, and choose the one that best describes your work, whether you're a funder or a nonprofit or another stakeholder type, so that we can really make sure that we are including the broadest perspectives and including that research as a part of our reports that will be due out in the fall. So today we're going to explore the topic of women's mental health across the lifespan. We'll discuss the unique challenges that women and girls face, contributing to rising mental health needs, while also exploring those bold initiatives and opportunities for philanthropy to transform the system for lasting impact on the lives of women and girls. In the course of our conversation, we'll explore topics that relate to strengthening girls' resilience and really setting them up for success, while also advancing women's mental health in the workplace and key opportunities and areas of focus as we do that, while turning to maternal mental health and supporting women as they navigate aging. But before we get started, I want to highlight a few housekeeping items. At any time during the webinar, please, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenters. Just type your question into the Q&A box at the bottom of the control panel, And as time allows, our moderator, Allison, will bring in those questions as a part of the conversation while also sharing those at the end as we wrap up our conversation. The webinar will be recorded, and we will share a link for folks after the event if you are unable to join or for the full time or would like to share it with other folks. And then additionally, I wanted to point out that subtitles are available for today's discussion, and you can turn them on by clicking the closed captions button below. But please bear in mind that they're automatically generated by Zoom, so we apologize in advance for any inaccuracies. With that, I'm pleased to introduce and hand over the conversation to our Executive Director, Allison Niemann.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And as Kristen mentioned, last year, Mindful Philanthropy launched a new initiative called With Her in Mind, focused on building momentum and activating funding and support of women and girls' mental health. So funders have long supported education, workforce, and health initiatives for women and girls, both domestically and internationally. But mental health has not been routinely, intentionally included as a component of funding strategies. So as a part of this work, our goal is to uplift the intentionality of mental health as a part of these different issue areas and focus areas. And so as a part, we've released 3 different pieces of guidance that span the lifespan of women and girls, with a 4th to be released in July. And so from teenage girls to women in the workforce to maternal mental health to aging and mental health, these really do focus on these key points in a woman's lifespan that are ripe for discussion and ripe for thinking about the unique and special needs of women during these transition periods. So I know as a woman who is a mother with a teenage girl in the workforce and someone who is facing aging, the topic is of utmost importance and relevance to me right now in my life. So I'm thrilled to welcome our first speaker, Joy Burkhard, who is the Executive Director of the Policy Center for Maternal Mental Health. She founded the organization in 2011 after leading policy work in California to address mental health and is dedicated to closing gaps in maternal mental health care with a systems level approach. So welcome, Joy. I know this issue is very personal for you as well. I'd like to also welcome Dr. Millie Kaggwa, Senior Clinical Advisor for Africa at Population Services International, who supports a service delivery portfolio that spans over 30 countries in maternal, newborn, and child health, family planning, and sexual and reproductive health programs. And Dr. Millie, thank you for joining us today all the way from across the world. And Larissa May, who is the founder and executive director of Half the Story, a digital well-being pioneer who ignited a digital grassroots movement that gave rise to Half the Story and has been named a digital wellness activist by Times, Forbes, Refinery29, Good Morning America, and NBC. Welcome, Larissa, who's also joining us from not quite as far around the world, but somewhere in the world today. And Dr. Kathy Pike, who is the CEO of One Mind and is also a professor of psychology at Columbia University Department of Psychiatry and Mailman School of Public Health. She is the founder and former director of the Columbia WHO Center for Global Mental Health, where she directs the Mental Health and Work Design Lab. She is also the founder and president of the Global Fund for Mental Health, an organization that assists diverse mental health initiatives worldwide. So we have a stellar panel with us today and really thrilled to dive into this conversation. So Larissa, I want to start with you today. We know that 50% of girls today are experiencing sadness and hopelessness, that 1 in 3 have often considered, attempting suicide, with 1 in 10 actually attempting. So this issue is very present for young and teenage girls. So I wonder if you could highlight some of the key factors that you think are contributing to the rise of mental health challenges with girls today.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here with such an incredible group of panelists. I think first, zooming out, I just want to set the stage to answer to your 1 in 3 girls has seriously considered suicide, 1 in 3 teenage girls. Alongside that, 1 in 3 teenage girls feels bad about their body because they're going on social media. And the average American teenager is spending between 8 and 10 hours a day on a platform, which is 30 years of their life. For me, as a young woman in college, I almost ended my life because of the role that social media played in my story. And I firmly believe and see through the data and the work that we do at Half the Story, which is an organization that I founded to help support the next generation in the digital age because I didn't have the tools myself, that social media leads to an opportunity cost of life. If we're spending 8 hours a day on these devices, it's largely taking away from our basic human needs, sleep, human connection, nutrition. And not only that, we're living under a magnifying glass and constantly comparing ourselves to others. Even myself today, I'm on the other side of the world. I pulled up my screen. I had a million ads, a million photos of women who quite honestly looked incredibly thin. And I wouldn't be lying to say that I didn't think twice about myself. And this is a story that we deal with no matter what age we're living through. And right now, technology is really at the cornerstone of what young people are dealing with. And we saw even the Surgeon General yesterday making the bold announcement that we want to have caution labels just like we do on cigarettes for social technologies.
Yeah, Larissa, I think those are, I mean, it's a really powerful testimony in your story. And there's so many things that, you know, girls are facing that maybe they didn't face when, you know, I was growing up, and thinking about, you know, that have being constantly in your face, whether it's the ads or comparison. We know that, you know, for women, we can struggle a little bit more with comparison. And so having that in your face can be really challenging. Dr. Milley, I want to go to you, and I know that you may have to turn off your video on and off throughout. Oh, there you are. I'm so glad you're with us. But with your kind of global perspective on, you know, on women and girls and what you're seeing as some of the most pressing challenges for women and girls right now globally, where do you see similarities? Where do you see some differences, whether it's with teen girls or even broader into, you know, to the to maternal mental health?
Thank you. Very, very happy to be a part of this panel and to discuss this really very important topic. I think women and girls I've always been passionate about women and girls. And one of the things that I find to be quite really sad is that women continue to face a myriad of challenges. These haven't changed, and they are pretty much across the whole life of a woman, you know, including things such as health, access to health, education, economic participation, social issues. And these will affect women whether irrespective of the region of the world that they are coming from. So whether they're in high income countries or low income countries, these are some of the issues that all women will be facing. When it comes to reproductive health, maternal health, some of the most pressing issues really is access. You know, healthcare access is a big issue. Girls face barriers in accessing comprehensive information, comprehensive health care. And this is for both reproductive health and maternal health, which is a problem even for women in the developed world. We've seen that women in the developed world also have issues with maternal health care access. And in many regions, not only Africa, there's still limited access to contraception, to sexual reproductive health, even just maternal health itself. All these contribute, I'm sure everybody listening in knows that all these will contribute to a constant mental pressure that women face that affects their mental well-being. But interestingly, there's not so much that is talked about the women's mental health well-being, and yet all these forces are really constantly affecting women: gender-based violence, domestic abuse, sexual assault, human trafficking. The violence that women face in almost any part of the globe will cause not only find them immediate physical and emotional trauma, but also has a lasting impact on women and effect on women, especially their mental health. And these are some of the things. Whether whether you come from a high income country or low income country, women still face this. Probably what varies is the degree, and the access issues will depend on, of course, where you're best. But I think that almost all women face these very same social, cultural, traditional expectations that really impact on women's well-being. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Milley. And I think you highlight really the role that women play in society, kind of that at the center of community, and therefore a lot of different burdens or different roles that women play, and the barriers that come with the access to care, both for health and mental health. Joy, I want to go to you for a minute. And, you know, like I mentioned at the beginning, as women, we come to this with our own personal experience and stories on this particular issue. And so drawing as from your personal experience as a mom, and your expertise in maternal mental health. How has it shaped your perspective on your work and how you're pursuing the work that you're doing right now?
Well, it's great to be here. And I so appreciate that question. And I just want to acknowledge that I think probably many of you who are here today have a personal story that touches mental health in some way, or you wouldn't be here, right? Maybe it's your own personal experience with a mental health disorder that you didn't feel comfortable talking about. And it feels safe to be among colleagues who are here talking about this important issue today, or a mother or a grandmother or a best friend, for example. So I just want to acknowledge we all come to this work with mental health in mind because of a personal story. And I say my worlds collided as I had spent 24 years actually at Cigna Healthcare, but I was at Cigna Healthcare, a large health insurer here in the United States. And I say the system's bad, and people go, "Oh, you worked for a health insurer?" I did. They were incredible people aiming to do the right thing in a challenging, fragmented system. I was working on implementing new laws at the state and federal level, and also quality improvement activities, monitoring whether the services and care we wanted to see be delivered to the population were actually being implemented, and what could we do about it. I also was involved in a volunteer women's organization nationally that raised the red flag about untreated postpartum depression, that so many women in the network were suffering and not getting the help they needed, and as well as the community-based organizations that the Junior League worked with, raising the red flag that something was going on here and it deserves some attention. I also was navigating care for my own brother, who had suffered from social anxiety and really in depression for, I think, his whole life. I remember dropping him off at preschool, and he would cry and cry and cry, and it never stopped. Like so many kids will eventually stop and get socialized. He struggled, and he ultimately. I tried to navigate the system, as I mentioned. He ultimately took his own life, and so when I became pregnant myself and all these worlds kind of colliding, I knew I had to do something myself. I searched for organizations that were doing something around maternal mental health and getting to the bottom of why there were gaps in care and what could be done about it. And I didn't find anyone. I found great organizations providing direct service and trying to fill a gap, but no one getting to the bottom of why. So we founded the Policy Center for Maternal Mental Health 14 years ago to get to the bottom of why and explore the levers for change, systemic levers for change. And what Dr. Milley shared resonated with me on a number of fronts, but particularly around access to care. And I just want to flag that, I think the United States, with the Affordable Care Act and expansion of Medicaid and even postpartum Medicaid extension through 12 months, what we know is that doesn't mean that there is availability of providers. So we have a lot of work to do around access to care here in the United States, both for maternity care and, of course, mental health care. And that's where we're really wanting to lean in.
Yeah, Joy, I thank you for that. And thank you for sharing more about your personal story and your why for coming to this issue. And I think there's such an incredible, I know we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but incredible opportunity for mothers in particular. We know that, you have to take that baby to the doctor about 8 or 9 times during the first year, and that care is focused on the infant. And yet it's such a huge opportunity to address some of those challenges that the mom is experiencing as well, whether through screenings or other things. And I know that you're working on a lot of that through the policy work that you're doing. Kathy, I want to highlight for a minute the work that you're doing in the workplace. And so you bring a vast experience and knowledge base of the mental health sector into your work. But you're currently focusing on kind of the workplace at One Mind and the work you're doing. And what are the characteristics that really help women thrive in the workplace? And what are some of the challenges that you're seeing right now with women's mental health in the workplace? And where can organizations and companies, kind of do more to put those characteristics in place?
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Glad to join this conversation. And with a perspective looking at workplace, I think one of the critical issues that has been true forever, but where the curtain got pulled back with the pandemic is around women who are employees who are also caregivers. And so major additional burdens on your female employees in terms of caring for dependents, whether they're children or aging parents. And I think one of the, in my experience, in clinical practice and in doing this work in the workplace, is that women also often are apologetic for the burden that falls on them and having to take a morning off to take an elderly parent to a medical appointment, or the juggling that they're doing. And I would like to challenge all of us, or urge all of us to turn that on its head and recognize that as the superpower of women, being able to do so many things well, and actually recognize that within the workplace. So what helps in the workplace, I think, is recognizing that people come with a lot of, they're more than just an employee. And women thrive in workplaces that recognize that mental health and well-being of their people matters to their overall culture and the overall productivity of a workplace. And women are much more likely than men to talk about mental health issues in the workplace. So to initiate employee resource groups, for example, to initiate webinars and workshops around mental health and well-being, and supporting that in the workplace is good for the women who are initiating this, but actually good for everyone, because really it's women who are the pioneers in advancing this work frequently, and advancing this work is going to be for the benefit of everyone in the workplace.
Kathy, I'm wondering if you could just double click on that a little bit, and even beyond the workplace. So why is investment in women's mental health kind of a strategic opportunity for all of philanthropy? And I know you come at this with a really interesting viewpoint because you're a mom of boys as well. But do you talk about it as like, why is investment in women's mental health really strategic?
Well, yeah, I'm a mom of boys and girls. So I have 3 boys and a daughter and a niece who grew up with me. So full household of boys and girls. And the data are absolutely clear that when we invest in women's mental health, the women themselves benefit, right? Getting women to effective treatments in a timely way has a very good prognosis. So we have better outcome for the individual who is carrying the stress or the burden or the symptoms. And then the data are beautifully dramatic in that we know that when we take care of women's mental health, that the next generation also benefits. And so we see a intergenerational effect. And my colleague at Columbia, Myrna Weissman, in the Department of Psychiatry, she and I have talked about these dynamics, and she's been part of several multinational studies that demonstrate that when we take care of women's mental health, we see a generational impact. And actually, it can even somewhat diminish, but it does carry to a next generation. It's really, really amazing.
I love that, because we think about even right now, so much of our conversation around mental health is focused on the youth crisis. And we need to focus on youth. And yet there are some strategic opportunities upstream when we think about investment in women and the impact, kind of that return on investment, with youth and the coming generations. And so I
when
want
you say that, Allison, investing in youth means investing in parents.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. We can't just say youth. It has to be youth and their families, their caregivers, the system and the household and the environment in which they grow up in. And that includes especially those close relationships, because we know that those close relationships have such an impact on a youth's mental health. So Larissa, I want to go to you and talk a little bit. We were just talking about youth. And so when we think about solutions for teen girls' mental health, one of them might be investing in moms and women, and that's very upstream, but like, what are some other ways that we can invest and prioritize solutions for teen girls right now?
Right now, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing, I mean, I've been working in the digital wellness space for the last 10 years because I saw that as my own alarm bell as a young person when educators, teachers, and caregivers, and even doctors around me didn't say, Lars, as a part of this equation, you need to also be addressing the role that the tech in your pocket is playing. And so I firmly believe that we have to start addressing digital wellness from the inside out and to start incorporating that as a part of the greater mental health story. And we do that at Half the Story through our intervention-based education programs. But I think what's more important about what we do and what we've seen work is that we have to have youth-led solutions, young people at the core, designing, building, testing, breaking, and leading these programs. And if they're not, it's not going to work. I'll tell you right now that I would be out of a job if I didn't have my bosses, which are the teens at our organization. And more importantly, the data also tells us that 40% of girls are actually reporting to be happier when they have a mentor or a near peer leader. So really incorporating those solutions while also supporting the holistic ecosystem of caregivers, admin, and also other siblings is critical. But I believe that for youth, we need it built by youth, in partnership with youth, and led by youth if we want to see real change.
Yeah, I love that, Larissa. And I know that there's so much in terms of the digital solutions. You highlighted a couple of things. There's lots of legislation right now that's in play, but I really also love that on the other end of that, you highlighted those relationships, the mentors, the relationships, and how do we really help teen girls in particular strengthen and build those relationships to be in community with one another. I know I've seen that in my own daughter's life and community, and how that has been such a life-giving aspect of her own mental health. And they talk about their mental health in a way that, you know, previous generations have not. And we have so much to learn from them, and kind of listening to your point around those solutions. Joy, as we think about the role of moms, and that, you know, the research shows us very clearly the mother-child dyad and the importance in fostering healthy attachment, growth, and development, especially in those early years. But how can philanthropy really support and advance maternal mental health beyond just direct services? So what are some of those opportunities for investing in systems change that need to happen?
I appreciate that question so much. And first, I want to start with community-based organizations really matter in this space. Just as we heard, teen girls need peers and those to speak with who've gone through similar situations as they have. And I have one of those teen girls upstairs sleeping right now and living all that Lars has shared. Women in general need each other. We need to be in community. And so community-based organizations are of utmost importance. And I want to start with that. And we also believe that we should be supporting those community-based organizations around how to sustain their work long-term, not just chasing grants or having to do the really hard work of community-based fundraising, which is important, but sometimes the ROI is so slim. And so what does that look like? It looks like supporting them and potentially becoming Medicaid billing entities or Medicaid providers, and billing for certified peer support services, or even doula services or CHW services. I think that's an incredible opportunity. We're dappling with some of that through a pilot that I think some of the funders on the call today are investing in, and I thank you for that. But we also are deeply troubled by the fact that the healthcare system is not delivering on its promises. So we know pregnancy, right, is a medical episode of care. And there is no systemic model for screening, diagnosis and treatment. And we are paying, right, as a society or as employees, employers, we are paying for mental health care that's not being delivered. And so this is deeply troubling to us, and we're really looking upstream. We talked about looking upstream to look at mothers, and that there's no health without maternal mental health, or a mother's and parents' mental health. But we're also looking upstream around policy. So what can we do to support the health system, right? The fragmented health system here in the United States, do what it's supposed to do. There are guidelines for maternal mental health screening, diagnosis and treatment, yet it's very difficult for a variety of reasons, which we, are working on, including how we pay obstetric care providers and pediatricians, for example. How are we moving upstream to look at those things? So I would challenge philanthropy to think big and think upstream about how do we fix these systems so that they work for families in the first place. Ideally, none of us would need nonprofits, right, or philanthropy to invest in these systems. And how do we get there? Starting with investments in community and national organizations to unpack those levers and go deep on them.
Yeah, thank you, Joy. I think that's there's so many opportunities there. It's kind of white space, and I'm glad that you're doing that work. One of the things that I have found fascinating over the last year and a half, as we have been really lifting up the issue of women's mental health, is that, and Dr. Milley, you highlighted it when we spoke the other day, but that when we talk about this work, that we often hear, oh yeah, we're doing mental health, or we're doing, women's mental health. But they're not, especially in the global space, intentionally integrating mental health as a focus area. And so Dr. Milley, I want to go to you, and what are the barriers to integration of mental health, women's mental health, into some of the things like reproductive health or other things that you have heard within the global space?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question that you raise, because a lot of work has been done and continues to be done in the space of women's reproductive health, around maternal health issues. In the recent past, we've seen a lot of a push to integrate reproductive, maternal, newborn, child health, and adolescent health care. And all this is meant to address the woman as a whole. But I think the gap I see is then integrating a very important aspect of women's health, which is the mental health piece. So adding mental health into the agenda, it has not been really one of those things that has been integrated into this whole drive to look at the woman from an adolescence all the way up to aging. And yet it is very important to have that aspect also addressed. And I think some of the barriers could be structural or systemic factors. And also there's the limited understanding and appreciation what aspects of health and social contexts, how do they look like in the different geographies, in the different regions, and how do they really impact on the mental health or well-being of women? I'd like to give an example. For instance, research has estimated that around 20 to 25% of women in low and middle income countries experience perinatal depression. Of course, we know this causes a significant and lasting implication for women and women's mental health. But just including that already is a call, should be a call to see how are we adding mental health to, for instance, antenatal care or immunization, postnatal care, when women come back with their children. Someone mentioned, one of the panelists mentioned that a woman will come back at least 9 times in a year. Those are all opportunities to address that issue in many women who are already having some form of perinatal depression. But these are missed, and sometimes it is because of the inadequate way that the health system is structured and the lack of attention to the unique attributes or women-centric attributes that affect mental health. Women will delay treatment. Women usually will not even be aware of how the diseases present. So if they're taking their children, they might not realize that this could have been a good opportunity to have this problem that she's been battling with also addressed. So I think the way the system is set up has not necessarily been encouraging to integrate women's mental health in the already existing structures, which is really pretty much a low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and Kathy, I see you nodding. I think there is such a low-hanging fruit there, but I mean, any thoughts from any of you on like, so what are the maybe plays for philanthropy on the in like kind of harvesting that low-hanging fruit? Like, what are some of the pilots and things that philanthropy could really do to start to change the system and bring it to a place where it can be picked up and scaled?
Do you want to?
Yeah, I
Go
see you.
ahead.
Gonna jump in.
I'll follow.
Okay. Dr. Millie, did you want to jump in or?
Yes, I'd like to jump in. Well, there's a couple of, addressing some of these challenges in a comprehensive way will definitely be work. There's no, I think, easy bullet, but as I said, there are ways in which we could create collaborations that work, and just starting from that angle, what collaborations can we have that are already existing that can actually be part of the solution. So for instance, I'm just going to talk about PSI. PSI, we have a program, for instance, called the Maverick Collective, and this was funded in 2013 in partnership with the Melinda French Gates and Her Royal Highness, the Crown Princess of Norway. And this is a community of women in philanthropy that are interested in really having impact on what we call experiential philanthropy, having impact, learning alongside the programs that they're supporting, learning alongside teams that they're working with, so that the solution, really, they can advocate for a solution or a change, which is possible. So for instance, in Kenya, PSI has this program, a digital health program that already is already being implemented by the PSI Kenya office, and that it's a digital program reaching out to women, and including mental health in there is a really simple hanging fruit because they're already accessing information, they're already accessing linkages, what we call to as signposting, to where they could go for further maybe services, other health services for themselves. But again, adding mental health into that seems it would be a very easy lift because the structure has already been created, the tools and resources have already been created, and so you can easily integrate mental well-being into an already existing program.
And then,
Yeah. Oh,
go ahead. I can go
I
after
was going to add
Larissa.
on to that quickly. First off, Dr. Millie, I'm a huge fan of the Maverick Collective, and I think it's the best example of women coming together to move money together. And that's another big thing that we need to see. If we want these outcomes, we need men moving money into women's causes, and we need women moving money together into these causes to make it happen. But what you were saying about where does return on investment look like for impact? At half the story right now, what we're doing as the leaders in mental health and social media intervention-based education, instead of trying to compete and build 400 chapters ourselves, we're actually partnering with Girls Inc., which was an organization that was founded in 1864, to tailor our programming to be focused on the biggest issues that young women from elementary through high school are facing in the digital age. And because we have the technological infrastructure and innovation, we're co-fundraising for a partnership to, one, help scale our work, but two, bring one of the most pressing issues of this time to their girls. And a lot of times, when you go to funders or you're in these types of rooms, I think organizations are oftentimes fighting for dollars. But I think all of us know here that the outcome is the system being funded. The outcome is us partnering and bringing our girls into future Maverick collectives who are successful because of the programs that we create. And I'm hopeful that more of us can find ways to be puzzle pieces within the greater world of philanthropy, as opposed to just trying to compete, because that's where the greatest impact happens, both for funders, but also for organizations.
Oh,
I think we lost Lars for a minute, Larissa for a minute. So Kathy, do you want to jump in?
sure. Just building on what Dr. Millie has said, Larissa.
And
Oh, go ahead, Larissa. We lost you for a sec. Do you want to finish there?
oh no, I was just going to say the net is that by collaborating, we de-risk all outcomes for both funders and organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And expanding on that, I think the way I think about it is we have been duped into a scarcity mindset, and there's no scarcity here. There's no shortage of resources. It's about allocation. And actually, As soon as we shift our mindset to understand that actually there's an opportunity for expanding the pie, expanding the opportunities, and it's about how we decide to deploy resources, how we can partner and collaborate immediately multiplies. And I think is a really critical mindset shift within the world of funding and philanthropy. I think the other thing about funding and philanthropy is that the issues we're talking about are big issues, and they're issues that ultimately belong to society and to culture shift. But philanthropy can be critical in catalyzing change, in taking risk, in piloting and demonstrating strategies that work and testing them. And so I think it's really the role of philanthropy here is, I think, for example, from our organization perspective at One Mind, we have one of our signature programs is around research, funding women scientists, funding science that will uncover some of the relationship of hormone changes through the female lifespan and how that impacts mood and mental health. Huge opportunity for philanthropy. We have an accelerator funding women who are doing innovative, pioneering work as founders in startups. Women are not getting funded at the rate that men are in startups. Let's move money to women founders who are likely to be focused on women's issues. Funding programs in workplaces. We just had a program that's focused on the mission-driven, purpose-driven nonprofit sector. That sector is disproportionately employs women. It also, it's also a sector of society that is salaried at lower rates, that is funded at lower rates. Let's fund our nonprofits and resource these nonprofits to be able to be strategic, to be able to build, to be able to pay people a living wage. And when we use philanthropy to catalyze and to demonstrate that those efforts really have transformational opportunity, then we go to Joy's policy center and we get the policy written so that the states take over and it becomes a sustainable, scalable, national, global change.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy, for highlighting some of those really practical ways. And what I love about the conversation is that I think women are natural collaborators, and it makes collaboration a really important part of this work. And I think it's just part of our DNA and who we are, and we love to bring others in and partner and collaborate. Okay, so I want to turn the conversation a little bit, and I'm excited about this next segment as a middle-aged woman. We haven't talked at all about aging, and this is a piece of guidance that Mindful has coming out in the next few weeks. But often as we think about the lifespan of women, and even if we think about the education that we all get as women, right, throughout our lifespan, whether it's as a teenager, whether you're entering into motherhood, or you think about breast cancer risk or these other things, we often don't get a lot of education about what's happening to us as we're aging. And I know we've talked about, Kathy in particular, that it's a huge opportunity from a research perspective. But I want to start with you and maybe Dr. Millie, both of you, on, what are the issues impacting women's mental health as they're aging, and some of the, where are the gaps right now?
Mm-hmm. There are enormous gaps in terms of addressing what's happening developmentally, and what the hormonal changes are, what other developmental changes may be for women in later stages of life, and how that impacts mental health overall, but in this context, mental health. And it's hugely problematic because when you go to a healthcare system, they're frequently failing to consider the developmental stage and what might be happening. So, for example, I just recently had a clinical consultation with a family. The woman just went into menopause, which happened, I found out because I asked. They didn't even raise it, but she had developed this major depression, unprecipitated, not understanding what was going on. And I said, well, how old is she? And I'm speaking to the spouse, and is anything going on in terms of menopause? And he said, well, actually, she's, in menopause, and it started right around when she started having, symptoms of menopause. And they've been to doctors, they've been to emergency departments, she's been hospitalized. Nobody's talked to them about the impact of menopause on mood. So I think there are huge opportunities and huge need to educate the general public and educate our healthcare providers around what these developmental stages mean for how we understand mental health opportunities and risks.
Yeah, and Dr. Millie, I want to go to you around, what does this look like in the global context in particular around aging? It's when the responsibilities of caregiving are often for women. You have maybe teenagers, and you're caregiving for elder parents, and you're at that maybe the height of your career, and you're experiencing, all of these different mood changes. But that also can be different in the global context, as a lot of the burden, women live longer, we know, than men, right? And so what does that look like in the global context, Dr. Millie?
Yeah, thank you for that question. One of the things is when I pondered this question, because of course aging looks different from region to region. It looks different from woman to woman. That's, I think, one of the biggest issues, is that it's different for every woman. If you talk to two women who are having hormonal imbalances, they'll not be the same hormones. Someone will have very high estrogen, another will have very low progesterone, and the symptoms will vary. One of the things that traditionally and so in most societies, women have been conditioned to accept these aspects of these parts of their lives to be normal. You've been taught to persevere when you're going through menopause. You've been taught to persevere during childbirth, during child rearing, and also through menopause. So many women, especially around the globe, don't even know that they could be some access to some support for menopause. You don't have to go through those hot flashes. Maybe there is a solution if you speak to your health provider. Most women will just suck it in and really just suffer the whole menopause. Unfortunately, menopause lasts a really long time. So that's a really long time for women to be grappling in the dark and not knowing exactly where they can, if there is help, if it is normal, and whether there is even something that can be done. So if we already have low education levels, we already have low understanding of even our sexual reproductive health, you can imagine that when it comes to aging, that is even pretty much lower, even in the educated sectors. I in my own cohort of women who I am with, who are aging with me, every single day you find women really being surprised and shocked by the symptoms of menopause, because they present in a very different, in a variety of ways, which many times go undetected by providers, by the women themselves, by the spouses, and actually by the people who they deal with. So many people, I would say globally, many women are suffering in silence. And probably it's the lack of understanding of what aging, this part of aging, how it looks like for women, and the fact that it's so different in every single woman is creating a big barrier already, because people won't know what is there, what can they do to receive help, where can they go, and what should they be looking out for anyway.
Yeah, thank you. And I find this conversation somewhat shocking, because as I've entered into kind of aging and been having conversations with peers and colleagues, there have been, conversations around, well, my doctor told me just to like wait it out, or it'll go away soon, or, it's like, where am I supposed to go for information? And especially if it is so varied across, right, the cycle of aging. Joy, where are you optimistic in terms of policy and funding landscape for supporting women experiencing perimenopause and menopause? What are some exciting opportunities that you see?
Well, first, I just want to start by saying that I do think this is very much an underfunded and resourced area, in as much as maternal mental health has been. This perhaps is even greater divide and gap in resources and response. But I'm going to start by saying that, so much of the challenges around perimenopause are the same as they are around maternal mental health. What we're hearing about now is that women may go to the doctor and be sort of dismissed, or there's no one size fits all. That's the same thing that we see around maternal mental health. And so as I hear my colleagues speak today, I think if we can solve this problem in the health delivery system around maternal mental health, then we can scale those same solutions across the lifespan. And let me give you a little bit of an example of something that we were involved in that we're seeing pay off in that way. And then I'll come back and add one more little tidbit, is that we ended up passing here in California, where I'm based, as part of our state policy platform around maternal mental health, a mandate to screen obstetric providers, OBGYNs, midwives, and family practice providers, to screen for maternal mental health disorders starting in pregnancy. New onset happens as frequently in pregnancy as in the postpartum, leads to preterm birth, a leading cause of preterm birth and low birth weight babies, and of course can carry over into the postpartum if we don't detect early. And so one of the curb cut effects that I think some of us have heard about, that curb cut notion that if you solve one problem, you may see it carry over. And so the curb cut notion comes from putting cuts in curbs on streets so that those in wheelchairs can get on and off sidewalks easily. We all benefit from that, right? On bikes and strollers. And so we passed this mandate, which is really difficult to do for a very variety of reasons, which I'm happy to share offline. But what we found was that providers are now, because they don't know who's pregnant, they don't know who's in the postpartum, they're screening everyone here in California. And so I just use that as an example, as if we can master this for one subset, teen girls or teens or women in the childbearing age, we will see this be solved for across the lifespan. The other thing I wanted to share is that the National Academies of Sciences recently convened a similar discussion around women's mental health over the lifespan, talking about these very issues. And I was hopeful about the interest by Congress, federal agencies like HRSA, the Health Resources and Services Administration, that there is deep interest in women's mental health and aging at this time. The White House has launched an initiative around women's health, as many know, and hopefully regardless of party, and that this needs to be nonpartisan, certainly. So I think the timing's fantastic around women's mental health. All stars are aligning and coalescing, and thanks to all of you for being on too. I think other funders, we need you in this space, but hopeful about what I'm seeing, and certainly I'm living in this moment myself. So glad to hear the excitement around the issue.
Yeah, Joy, thank you. And I think we've had a couple questions come in the chat, but what you're highlighting is that, even the need for education around menstrual cycle or menopause, perimenopause, there's so many different opportunities, and yet we can, whether it's mood disorders around menstrual cycle or around, menopause, and there's a lot of the similar opportunities for investment from philanthropy, whether it's ramping up education, thinking about screenings, the integration of mental health into, the clinical system or hospitals, and a lot of the solution set can be similar at the various life stages for women. And I think that's where coming back to radical collaboration. So how do we think about these different phases that women go through, and then think about collaboration around, the solutions so that we can get there faster? There was a question around health. Oh, go ahead, Kathy, jump in.
I wanted to jump in to say also, I think with these big issues, there's a tendency, especially when we're talking about funding, there's a tendency to get stuck in the making the case that this is a big issue and it's a big problem, and it's, the serious and everything that's wrong, right? And everything that's problematic and crisis of biblical proportion kind of, drama. And we do need to make the case. And I think it's really important that we make the case, but I think it's also really important to remember that funding goes to solutions. And there are enormously good programs and projects and pilots underway. And so one of the things that we absolutely don't need in the world is lots more tiny little dots that are getting funded underdose. And, I've talked about this a lot with funding, but one of the big issues with philanthropy is that often with good intent, we have somebody who has a personal experience, who wants to set up their own nonprofit or their own foundation and run this program. And we wind up with lots of little dots that are operating under threshold. And I really think, to go back to your question around philanthropy, the opportunity is to look at programs that are out there, and how do we connect the dots? Like, the point that Larissa brought up with working with another organization, the work that Joy's building on, the global work. There's so much out there for us to be sure that philanthropy is targeting getting us to the next stage, building on where we have footholds and traction.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I'm just thinking of a conversation I had this morning where we're partnering on how do we get more emphasis on, funding, but again, to the partnerships and collaborations, and how do we really make sure that the funding is, aligned, I think. So connecting those dots, aligning the funding so that it can be more impactful in having kind of the outsized change and impact that we really desire. I know that we're coming up on time, and so I am so grateful for your time today. I want to give each of you just 30 seconds to say, what is it that you are really excited or hopeful about? And you do have to keep it to 30 seconds. But I'll start with Joy, and then we'll go to Dr. Millie.
I'll just bring up that this year, a federal task force on maternal mental health was formed through federal policy that we introduced and wrote and passed. And so it's a very hopeful time for maternal mental health because of that task force and recommendations coming out to governors and others, and new medications, a greater awareness. So I'm really hopeful that the stars are starting to align around the policy levers and the other levers that need to be pulled. There's more clarity now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. How about you, Dr. Millie? What are you excited about in the philanthropic landscape?
I'm excited about that. We're beginning to see a building on the dialogue, pushing for women's mental health. We're beginning to see interest, and even just conversations are starting to build up. And I think I can see momentum coming up in the next couple of years, to see how we can, as a community, build comprehensive strategies that address women's mental health.
Thank you. How about you, Lars?
I'm excited to see that for new investment opportunities in new areas, whether it be digital wellness or others, that leaders like Melinda French Gates and other large organizations are coming together to develop pooled funds, that there are a couple that we've received funding from. And without that, this work would not be funded, because that signal is critical in order to get family offices and individual donors who might be less likely to write a check without having a big name like that. So that's really exciting. And I'm also excited to see more youth solutions being funded. And that's something that I hope to do in the future as we grow.
Thank you, Larissa. Kathy?
I am excited about young women leaders who I mentor and who I work with. And in conversation, as they lean into these issues, they are coming at them with expectations that are illustrative of earlier generations' fights and victories. And so they are empowered in a way that wasn't the case generations ago. They have a voice that generations ago didn't have, and they have a conviction around being able to advance change. And I think if we pass the mantle to them and put them in charge, we're going to see some really great effects.
Yeah, Kathy, I love that. And I mean, I watched that firsthand with my daughter and her friends and that generation, and they are an incredible force of nature together collectively.
Mm.
And I don't think they're going to settle for anything less than you know, what we really owe them, which is the best opportunity at for their generation. So thank you so much for all the panelists for your time and generosity of your expertise today. There is incredible momentum, and I love the idea and the talk around collaboration, because I think that that's how this work is going to get done. We do encourage those who are on the call to download the guidance from With Her in Mind and to look forward to the next piece of guidance that's coming out in July. And then finally, we are always looking for feedback. And so I know they're in the chat. There is a survey that we would love your feedback and input on this webinar. So please take that survey right now as we close out. And thank you again for highlighting, for being a part of this conversation today on women's mental health through the lifespan. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.